Rise of a Hero, written by ShoutingRambler, narrated by VintrBjorn. Hageon stood atop the battlements, leaning heavily on the carved stone. He was enjoying the relative freedom of his lighter leather armor compared to his heavy steel for battle. The coolness of the breeze was always welcome, but it was also a breath of fresh air in a city with tensions ready to boil over. It was heady, like a well-brewed tack, dizzying to the senses and bringing the same irrational joy that the alcohol burned through you. He tilted his head back as he pulled his hair from its tie, allowing it to fall freely down his back. It was lank and damp with sweat, with strands plastered across his broad forehead. His dark blue eyes roamed the stream of shining steel and fluttering banners in the city streets far beneath him before slowly scanning their way up the city of graven stone, finally coming to rest on the dark brown smear at the foot of the very wall he stood upon. The ledge beneath wasn't very wide, perhaps only 3 meters at most, before dropping down a good 13 meters to the fortress gates below. There had been enough room for them to rest after climbing the walls of the stronghold up to the peak where he stood. It was during that second climb when one of his men fell. In the days that followed, after the surrender of the Aton ruling council, but before the arrival of the formal Cirastian army, many bodies had been cleaned away, including that of his man, but the bloodstain had not been scrubbed from the stone yet. He doubted that it might ever be, only waiting for the rains to wash it away with time. 15 years of bitter warfare had a way of making people hard and indifferent. His comfort had come from the fact that his men that had fallen had been given warriors' pyres, their spirits allowed to rise on the floating embers to the fields of Sara Naad. It was hard to imagine that he had been at war for 15 years. His ruddy cheeks showed a youthful vigor that seemed a contradiction to the heavy wariness in his eyes. His life in the army had been longer than his life before, and he felt ancient now for it. This city had been key in their victory, but taking it seemed to have aged him 10 years. His brow and his eyes bore creases of wear and worry far beyond what a man his age should bear. He and his men had taken this city against all odds, and even against orders, to end the bloodshed. It had been the last holdfast of resistance. He would never deny that the infiltration had been desperate. They had ridden far ahead of their lines into the very heart of enemy territory, weeks ahead of their advancing army, over mountains that no one had thought they would be able to climb to avoid using the roads that the enemy watched and guarded closely. He had brought 20 good men over the walls with him, moving quickly and quietly through the fortress to open the gates for the other 13 men who waited. They had made their way in the dark, killing any opposition until they found the chambers of the ruling tribal council and had taken them hostage. They had hoped that it would be enough to stop the war just to have them in their control, but they had not expected the response to be so swift.
"Never thought this day would come,"
Ferric said as he joined Hageon. His armor was torn and bloodied. He had no replacement like Hageon, but he stood without pain.
"We can finally go home."
Hageon glanced over at his longtime friend. They had grown up together, and they had joined the army together. They had always kept each other safe. Ferric had been only 8 years old, a page for one of the nobles, while Hageon had been a brawny 12-year-old, serving as a squire. Ferric had been tiny then, an easy target for the larger boys. Hageon had made sure that they left him alone and taught him how to defend himself, helping him train and advance. Ferric had grown in height, but he was still thin and lanky. He had become a formidable warrior, likely one of the best in recent history. He and Hageon had shared rations, tents, and once on the frozen outskirts of the Peldurain tundra, they had shared a bunk to conserve heat and keep each other alive. Ferric liked to accuse Hageon of attempting to spoon with him, and Hageon never denied it, simply for the fact that the night had been so cold he very well might have tried to, just to raise some heat and keep them alive. Ferric had saved his life in battle more than once, and Hageon had returned the favor as many times. "What will you do now?" Hageon asked, distractedly. He was listening, yet somehow he could not bring his whole focus to his friend's words. His eyes were drawn to the army ranks that filled the streets below. "Do you think I could do anything else?" Ferric replied. "I am a warrior in blood, body, and spirit. I would go home for some time if I could, then find a new post. With any luck, it will be somewhere warm, where the girls will think I am devilishly handsome and charming, and I will leave them profoundly satisfied, lying on the warm sand of a beach." "I wish you luck with those endeavors," Hageon answered, raising an eyebrow at his friend. "You need it." "What about you?" Ferric asked, ignoring the jibe. "A war hero who ended 15 years of blood and strife in a single fell swoop? Likely there will be parades and festivals and feasts and balls in your honor. Every mother in the Empire and beyond will want you for a son-in-law." "I will leave for home to my family." The thought of all the rest made him shudder. "We made it in here with 20 good men, and you and I are the only ones left. I, for one, have had enough of all of this. We ended the war, and now I want to go home. My little brother and sister will be grown by now. They probably have no real memory of me." "The Emperor will want you at court," Ferric said firmly. At times, as a commander, Hageon forgot he could be commanded as well. He needed to remind his friend that if the Emperor truly wanted his presence, then he could not refuse. "The man who ended the war. Surely at least one ball or feast would be in order." Hageon wanted none of it. He had seen enough serving one of the nobles, waiting on their every command until he had finally been granted his own armor and blade. They symbolized that he was a knight, trained and blooded, and his own man. When Ferric's master had been killed in battle, Hageon had taken him on as his own squire and granted him armor and a blade as well. Hageon had made him his second-in-command when he had been granted his own unit. This mission, the one that the High Commander had expressly forbidden, had cost him everything but Ferric. He should have been court-martialed for it. He should have been arrested and had his commission as an officer stripped from him, but instead, his success had made him a hero. Hageon thought it must be some cruel trick of fate. "They knew what you were leading them into," Ferric said gently. "They also knew what their success would mean in life and in death. That was small comfort. Their lines lay some 100 miles to the west over mountainous terrain, crawling with enemy scouts and encampments. It was a miracle that they had even made it to the stronghold without being captured and killed. It was where the tribal council of Aten met to discuss matters of great importance, including a true alliance amongst the different mountain tribes in the country to present a united front against the Cirastian invasion. That was something that Hageon could not have allowed. Aten could not have held out any longer, but neither could the Cirastian army. It had been sheer idiotic madness. Hageon's men had kept the guards at bay, while he and Ferric took the tribal leaders hostage. It had degenerated into a bloody battle, with unexpected reinforcements returning to the fortress and attacking. His men had managed to restore order, but by then they had lost much of their force. It had taken a week for their army to break through the pass where they had been halted by guerrilla fighters, and another 8 days for their armies to make their way to Hageon and his men. Aten was a country of mountains. While on campaign, Hageon did not think he could recall seeing 1 league of flat land. It had kept their armies from reaching them sooner and meant that his men had to hold out that much longer.
You know I won't find comfort in your words, Varric,
Hageon answered, his tone flat.
Worth it or not, they died for it. There it is.
Varric shrugged, knowing when to leave his friend well enough alone.
How old will your brother and sister be now?
Hageon tapped his fingers against the stone as he counted and tried to think.
Odrin was 11 when I left. We were born almost 9 months apart exactly. Celesia, was 9. They'll be 26 and 24. I saw them for a short while before the Hargrand campaign when we had leave. That was 9 years ago, but I hardly remember them then. There were other matters at hand. Celesia?
Varric repeated, sounding torn between surprise and great amusement.
I don't believe I've ever heard your sister's full name used before.
And if you have any hope of living to old age, you will never use it in her presence, Hageon replied.
A lesson I learned very harshly, very young. Call her Sia, or not at all.
Odrin was never so feisty. I expect to find him busy reading and writing and studying. They had been of a noble house once, but they were falling into ruin. Hageon had not known it when he was a child, but the past 15 years he had heard enough about all of the great houses of the Empire to rival the Pelderai scribes. His father had gambled and drank away much of their house's money before marrying their mother. She had straightened him out and done much to staunch the hemorrhaging of funds, but the damage had already been done. They were floundering, and it had fallen all to his mother to recover. She had made several investments that likely would have been lucrative had the war not broken out and stymied all hope of financial gain for 15 years. Things had worsened when his father had passed away from an illness, though it surprised no one after the years of debauchery had taken its toll on his body. The situation had nearly become dire when no sooner than their father had passed, their mother was murdered. The claim was that the culprit was a former servant of the household who held a grudge for his dismissal, but there had been holes in the story that Hageon had never stopped questioning. The name of their house and their family had been dragged through the mud after heavy trials and loss. Hageon had already won them back status and renown as a great house to repair their social problems at court somewhat. His army commission would do nothing to put a dent in their debts. Their closest trading partners, Rickhaven to the north and Doston to the east, had negotiated a peaceful integration as part of the Empire, and the first 6 years of fighting had really been minor skirmishes with small pockets of resistance here or there, while fortifications were established and outposts manned. Hargrand, their neighbor to the west, had fought, and it had taken 8 months alone to make it through the swamps and bogs that served as the border between their countries. They had built roads through the marshes and had been plagued by saboteurs, spies, and assassins the whole way. When they had finally reached the heart of Hargrand, past the swamps, they found the Hargress had been woefully unprepared. They had relied almost entirely on their natural defenses and the work of their agents to stop the advancing army. 8 months of terrible slogging through festering, fetid water and mud for exactly 3 hours of battle before a surrender was announced. The true thorns in their side had been Kirkak to the southeast and Aten farther east past Doston. Kirkak was still wild and untamed. The people there were as feral as the land itself, and even the flowers and the bees there hated the invaders. Aten had withstood their invasion for 8 long years.
Varric, you aren't getting a new post after this,
Hageon finally said, breaking the silence that had stretched during his thoughts. Varric's eyes narrowed, and he stiffened to a more formal bearing.
My Lord Commander, the unit I commanded is obsolete now. You know that,
Hageon continued coldly.
And you did not see fit to recommend me for a new one. Ferric surmised, his tone carefully neutral. If Ferric knew his friend at all, he was weighing whether Hageon was speaking in truth or jest, and withholding his wrath for the appropriate moment if Hageon was serious. Hageon stood straighter, squaring his shoulders. I did not. You are to go home for 6 months of reprieve to be with your family and engage in whatever debauched behavior you so desire, and then you will present yourself to your men. Ferric blinked, his expression blank and uncomprehending. Hageon allowed himself a genuine smile, clapping his friend on the shoulder warmly. I recommended you for promotion. Demanded it, really. You ought to be given your own command now, stationed at a post of your choosing as Chief of Watch. About damn time, Ferric finally managed enthusiastically. Hageon chuckled. You'll make a good commander, better than others I've known in the past 15 years. You can choose a post in Rickhaven on the coast where the sun always shines, or you can watch the border of Borkon with all its wild monsters. I put in a strong recommendation, and once the paperwork clears, then you will be free to choose wherever you want to be stationed. They looked out together over the city, the ancestral safehold of the mountain tribes of Auten, both thinking that of all the posts he could choose, Ferric would never choose this one once established. Of all the places their blood travel had brought them, this was the place they unanimously agreed was the second worst. The first was never discussed. Ferric still looked stunned. Gods, Hageon, a command? A fort where the only fighting I'll see will be in the training yard or the occasional brawl. 6 months of leave? My mother will never be able to thank you enough. Gods, neither will I. We'll have drinks together to celebrate, and you can thank me by buying. Hageon turned away from the edge of the wall, away from the gleam of steel and iron and the waving banners far below, and walked further along the battlements. There had been no time to admire the city when they had taken it, and Hageon wished there had been. He had seen some of it when the 1st Division arrived, and he had given his report to the adjutant, the High Commander's voice at the front. The houses, short and squat and carved from the sandstone rock, were bleak and depressing. The people had remained hidden from him, though he could feel their eyes on him from windows and doors. The conqueror of their land, the harbinger of their end, he could never justify to them that he had only taken the city out of a desire to see an end to the bloodshed, to save everyone from more death and destruction. He knew that his actions would never be understood that way. He would be shown as a conqueror, a bloodthirsty warrior to be feared and respected. He had expected some kind of punishment. He had expected demotion for disobeying orders. He had expected a discharge and even an execution. He had been rewarded instead. He had been clapped on the back and given a goblet of wine, and his story had been listened to with rapt attentiveness by the adjutant. Tame, the man's name was. After a few more goblets of wine, he filled out a full report and sent it by courier back to Cirast, to the High Commander and the Emperor. Tame had said Hageon would go down in legend for this, like one of the great warriors of old. His name would be recited through the ages as a hero and a victor, a true conqueror, like the Cirastian warriors of days long past. Ferric seemed to believe that it was the appropriate response for their actions. Hageon did not. He had lost nearly all of his men. That was why he was leaving the army. Ferric still wanted to serve, and now he would be commanding. Hageon, Ferric said seriously. Hageon paused to glance back over his shoulder at his friend. You look like you've forgotten that we won, and by your actions, your orders meant peace. Hageon forced a smile on his own face. He had forgotten how well Ferric could read him. He spoke cheerfully, but his voice was hollow. You missed your calling, my friend. I thought the nags remained at court. And to think, there are people who have an image of you as polite, Ferric answered curtly. Hageon laughed a deep, unexpected belly laugh. Only because they have seen you compared to me. The sound of the city below should have been far off, but Hageon and Ferric glanced at one another as they heard the unmistakable sound of a fight somewhere farther along the wall. Hageon turned and followed the sounds. Whoops and shouts and curses and the crashing sound of bodies colliding with anything and everything around them. Ferric was close behind his commander, hand on his weapon and ready. Hageon feared the worst, thinking of the irate natives they were even now being forced to bow to the conquering armies. He and Ferric were fast approaching one of the sentry houses that dotted the walls when the sound grew louder. Hageon raised an eyebrow as the door rattled beneath the weight of something being hurled against it, then clicked open and swung ajar. His hand moved smoothly down to grasp the hilt of his sword. He glanced at Ferric and his friend nodded. There were 4 men standing inside, kicking a 5th that was struggling to get up off the floor. Shorter and more sturdily built than the others, with darker hair and fairer skin, Hageon guessed that he was a native of Bokarn. They were a hardy people, and often earned their way as mercenaries if they did not travel with the trading caravans. They were looked down upon by most other nations as wandering vagabonds, though that did not stop them from finding employment. The other 3 had rich copper skin and the leaner build of Dostin, most likely local knights in service to the Empire. The Bakari surged to his feet, slamming into the knees of one Dosti and bearing him to the ground. He fought to stay on top as he pummeled at the Dosti's face, but the other 2 dragged him off, hurling him back down. They carried on for some time, unaware of their unexpected audience. The Bakari's determination was admirable, though it was not helping him in the least. He refused to stay down, struggling back up to his feet and going on the attack again. He held his own more than enough against 3 men nearly a foot taller than him. Hageon would not help but think that this is why the Empire had been able to expand in the first place. Cirast had been drilling and expanding their military for generations, perfecting combat and warfare until they had once been the most sought-after mercenaries on the continent. This was just a farmer's brawl. "Gentlemen, would someone care to explain what's going on here?" Hageon asked loudly, finally intervening. He had seen enough. "Piss off," one of the Dostans said in a thick accent. "A bit of sport, is it, gentlemen? Is that what we're interrupting?" Hageon's temper flared. He grabbed the nearest Dosti by the shoulder, whipping him around before driving an elbow into his nose with a crunch that sent him crumbling to the floor. He tossed Ferric his blade. Ferric caught it deftly, without a word, resting it easily against his side and nodding keenly. "As it happens, I'm looking for a bit of sport myself, you know. Savages with sticks and rusty old swords, pathetic, hiding in the rocks and the caves like cowards for months on end. Let's have a real fight. Or was there a reason we took Dostin so quickly at the start? Are Dosti knights as untrained as they are provincial?" One of the remaining Dosti came at him. He drew back and with one solid blow sent the man sprawling again. His blood thrilled through him with a singing sensation that he loathed and loved. The hot blood from the man's nose prickled at the skin on Hageon's knuckles, and goose flesh rose on his arms. His shoulders rolled, and he stood straighter, twisting and cracking his neck. A visible snarl curled his lips as he embraced the deep heat that was rising in every muscle. Hageon grabbed the man by the collar of his shirt and hauled him up with one hand, slamming him back down to the wall before he headbutted him hard and let him drop to the ground. "I don't need your help," the Bakari snarled, wiping blood from his swollen lip and half standing. "Oh, I'm sure you don't," Hageon answered smoothly, a half-wild glint in his eye. "But I need this." The Bakari's lips curled up in a sneer, and he tackled one of the still-standing Dosti. His fists flew in a furious hail of blows, the Dosti's head rocking with each strike. The first had yet to rise, groaning and holding his bleeding, broken nose. The last one went for the Bakari. Hageon kicked the man's knee from behind, dropping him to the ground to grab him by his scalp and hurl him towards the door. Ferric gave him a swift kick in the ass to send him out. They tossed the first one out after him, Hageon having to lift the Bakari off the second before Ferric could get him off as well. The last was left unconscious on the floor after Hageon's headbutt. They decided to leave him where he lay. Ferric closed the door and leaned against it with his arms folded across his chest, bemused as Hageon set the fuming Bakari back on his feet. His face was bruised and cut, one eye nearly swollen shut, and his lower lip was split. There would probably be missing teeth as well, unless he was truly lucky. Hageon was sure there would be more bruises hidden all over the rest of him, but he doubted this angry little fellow would admit it to them. The rush of combat had not yet left the Bakari, his chest heaving. He was watching them like a wild animal, his one eye bright still from the fight. "You don't know when to stay down," Hageon noted, keeping his tone neutral. "And you don't know when your help isn't needed. I could have dealt with them," the Bakari answered, hacking out a gob of bloody spittle. "Charming," Ferric muttered. The Bakari glared at him, and Ferric deftly drew his kerchief from beneath his armor to offer it to him. The Bakari huffed in offense, and Ferric shrugged, tucking the handkerchief away. "What's your name?" Hageon asked. Bakari eyed him warily before answering. "Krazar, Archer's Guard, Private Second Class." "That's an unusual name," Hageon commented, wondering what on earth it meant in his native tongue, and what was it about the name that left an itch in the back of his mind. "I came from an unusual family," Krazar replied in a surly tone, touching his lip tenderly to assess the damage. "I'm sure you did," Ferric commented wryly, earning another malevolent glare. Hageon gave him a warning look before returning his attention to Krazar. "If you're an Archer's Guard, why are you up here on the wall? They only made it into the city not more than an hour ago." Krazar gave him a truly irked look. "I didn't start out up here. They dragged me up here. I was doing fine." "Of course you were," Ferric said. Krazar looked like he was on the verge of starting another brawl. Many a duel had been fought on account of Ferric's free commentary. Hageon ordered him to take a walk. Ferric, blatantly amused, saluted and left. Krazar looked up at Hageon, watching him warily. His dark brown hair was cropped short, his features narrow and angular, and his frame sturdy, but, Hageon thought, a little soft. There was something about this man that seemed to pick at Hageon's mind like a peeling scab. He had seen him before. A nagging familiarity hung about the Bakari like an aura. "So, thank you, I guess," Krazar finally said into the silence, clearly uncomfortable. "You're welcome," Hageon replied, equally uncomfortably. He was aware that he was staring with an odd intensity at the man and probably leaving him very concerned about his intentions. He was about to make a snap decision that he was sure would deeply annoy Ferric, but for some irksome reason, he felt the need to keep this man close. "With the war over, I am aiming to retire, and we are traveling home to Cirast. An auxiliary unit will likely be dissolved, and you'll have to make your own way home. Would you care for some company on the road?" Krazar returned his gaze with the same intense speculation. "Would your friend? What's the catch?" "No catch," Hageon said, shaking his head. "Just trying to do a good deed after spending so much of my life shedding blood. We plan to be on our way in the next few days." "Are the auxiliary forces already disbanded so quickly?" Crazer replied pointedly. I can send word to your commanding officer that I have contracted you into my service, and you will be resigning your commission effective immediately. I find it doubtful he would argue, Hageon offered. How could I ever bear to leave in such a way without so much as a goodbye? Crazer growled, wincing as he pressed at the bruises on his stomach and side. Hageon patted the fiery little Bakari on the head. We'll get along just fine, my friend. Come on. Crazer scowled and ducked away from his hand. Hageon gestured for him to follow as he left the sentry post and walked out along the battlements. Varric was waiting dutifully by the stairs, lanky form tucked nicely into a corner and leaning lazily against the wall with his arms folded over his chest. The corner of his lips turned up in a dry smile at the sight of Crazer following Hageon, but whatever comment he had been contemplating was withheld. Hageon was sure that Varric would find chinks in the Bakari's armor and drive a verbal spear through every single one. That was the one thing Crazer would have to learn to fend off on his own. Still, it was good that Varric was at least waiting for the time being. You're a wonderful friend when you're silent, Hageon noted, sensing his friend's restraint. I hope you know you'll be responsible for feeding and watering it, Varric answered shortly. We've only just ended one war, Varric, Hageon sighed. Don't start another one now. Varric gave a wry laugh and Crazer snorted. Despite his earlier display of belligerence, Crazer was surprisingly mild-mannered. There was a brief disagreement over having the physiker look over the wound from the fight, but Hageon won out in the end. The wait was longer than they expected. Hageon and Varric took to wandering the streets, admiring the city that they had conquered while they waited. The city of Gravenstone was not so much a city as a keep, with different areas for the different tribal representatives and their people. Most, it seemed, had brought cooks and medics and physicers and some few guards. It was why it had been so easy to take the stronghold once they were inside. The closest tribes had attacked fiercely when a survivor escaped and ran for aid. They had held out until it had been down to just Varric and Hageon holding the tribal council hostage behind a single closed door they had barricaded. Fortunately, before it had been breached, the 1st Division had arrived and smashed through to their rescue. The Autonian survivors from the attack were still gathered as well, but they were being held prisoner. The rest of the people were either Cirastian army or the clingers on that came with a marching army. Some natives had no real issue with the invaders, following along their trail and selling them meats and other foraged foods from their hunts. It was profitable for both sides, really. There was a large open space from the gates to the actual keep itself and to the surrounding cliff faces that formed the walls that were previously considered impenetrable. This was where many of the stone huts were carved with open spaces for tents or for animals. They were made to be permanent, to never rot and fall apart in the absence of human residents, and their endurance was haunting. This was meant to be a place used only in the greatest desperation, in times of great famine, for the tribes to come together and survive as one, or in times of warfare to call for truce when it was impossible for any victory without near annihilation. It was meant to be a symbol of survival, all things carved from one stone as all tribes are carved from one people, a sacred place. You're not seriously thinking of bringing him back to Cirast, are you? Varric asked as they walked, taking a bite of the pheasant leg they had bought from a vendor. They had tried to pay for it, at least, but the vendor had been so terrified that he nearly tossed the pheasant leg at them and ran. Not to Cirast. No, unless he would care to, Hageon said. The pheasant was excellent, juicy and plump, with meat nearly melting off the bone as he bit into it. He can travel with us until our paths diverge, or to Cirast, and I can help him find some manner of employment. Admittedly, he was distracted. Going over what he had seen of the fight earlier, he found it somewhat hard to believe that was the best Krazer could fight after years of being involved in warfare, but likely, being Archer's guard, he was stationed back and away from any heavy fighting. There was something else that did not quite fit right. The Bakari was a puzzle piece in the wrong place, and yet Hageon could not say where he should fit instead. Hageon, he's a foreign mercenary from a country that does not fall within imperial borders, Varric persisted, looking for once genuinely frustrated with his friend. Even if you are retiring and you'd make this your little pet project to keep yourself busy, you have to know that commissions and the like will not be forthcoming. He's not Dosti or Rakavish. He's a Bakari. They wander everywhere, even within their own country. You think you can make a place at court for him? Not at court, no, Hageon answered honestly, but I also don't intend to stay there. I intend to report back for such a time to rest and see my family, perform some duties at court that you have so gently reminded me of, and then I think I might see about buying a small estate of my own farther outside into the country, perhaps even in Rikaven or Doston. By then, with any luck, Krazer will be able to make a little something more out of himself as well, be it remaining as a retainer or a household guard, or, if he chooses, to wander where he may. I taught you as well, and you did not grumble so much then. Is this so different? Yes, Varric grumbled darkly. There is something you're not saying. They were interrupted by Krazer's emergence from the Physiker with salve for the cuts and bruises. Hageon sent a runner to the Bakari commander, informing him of his whereabouts and subsequent acceptance into Hageon's employment. The answer was a disgruntled acquiescence and near immediate discharge papers, which left Hageon wondering exactly how much trouble Krazer caused within his own unit. It seemed that he had not made any friends at the very least. Varric made himself scarce to find their horses and acquire one for Krazer, as well as supplies for the journey home. Somewhere in the midst of all this, there was still something about Krazer that Hageon could not identify, a nagging feeling that would not let go and yet would not make itself known. Hageon felt that somehow this man was important, or would be important. But he would never say it out loud, even to Varric. It would sound insane. They had 3 days of preparation for the journey home, during which Varric tormented Krazer with ceaseless barbed comments, and Krazer responded admirably, giving nearly as good as he got, though sometimes the language difference hindered him. Hageon was sure that some of the insults leveled at Varric and Bakari should have been much more offensive to him if he actually understood them, but Krazer never translated, and Varric never asked. Varric found them a guide for the treacherous mountain passes of Auton until they reached the border of Doston. Hageon had pictured long stretches of road in warm sunlight and the quiet peace past the ringing of steel that always seemed to deafen him. He had imagined seeing the wonders of the lands that they had passed without ever even knowing. Instead, it seemed he had elected to listen to Varric harass their newfound friend. They ate their meal in the saddle, hardtack and salted jerky, and kept riding until nightfall. The army, even the Archer's Guard, had trained Krazer well when it came to long travel with little food. His only complaint was Varric, really. But there was nothing to be done about that. Hageon knew the futility of telling Varric to rein himself in and left it between the two of them to sort out. Their guide did not speak much Cirastian, and Hageon, Krazer, and Varric had a 4-word vocabulary of Altani between the 3 of them. It made communication difficult. There was a great amount of pantomiming and pointing at the map. All the money you paid and you didn't get a translator? Hageon asked Varric pointedly when they made camp. Varric shrugged. I was lucky enough to find him. No one else was willing to even accept my money. We're conquerors, Hageon, and not a single one of them ever helped us during the siege. No turncoats amongst them. This fellow only came, I suspect, because I paid him double. Hageon looked to their guide, who had set himself up a little ways away from them, watching out into the dark.
He thought it would be the greatest irony for him and Ferric to have survived the whole of the war, even ended it themselves, only to be killed by a single irate native that shoved them over a ledge in the night. He wondered what these people's lives had been like before, how they farmed and traded with one another. He had seen how they fought, and it was as impressive as it was merciless, and he wondered if they were so relentless in everything they did, or if they had great festivals and feasts and songs. His thoughts turned to his younger siblings. They had been children when he left. All of them had been. Who would they be now? Try as he might, he could not envision what they might look like as adults. He could only remember the happy, squealing children he had played with and the tears when he had left. He had been resentful for a few months, thinking that Odrin should have come with him, his own brother at his side to face the coming trials, but he had come to realize his brother's place was at home. After a time, he was happy that he had stayed there. Odrin's constitution was too delicate for the things that they had seen. He wished that he could have written to them more often. He had tried in the beginning, but as time went on, words came less and less easily. He wanted to share nothing of his experiences with them, to shelter them from it all. Maybe he could have had some idea of who his family was now, if only they had been able to exchange letters more frequently. There was naught he could do but try and prepare for these strangers he was about to return home to, and mingle with and become a family. They rose early and set off, their guide rousing them indelicately by dropping all the cooking equipment in a heap with a tremendous crash. Ferric sat up with a sword in hand while Crazer leapt to his feet, prepared to fight. Hageon glowered at the man, but had no grasp of the language with which to reprimand him. The native seemed unashamed and even amused with himself. No doubt it was repayment for Ferric and Crazer relentlessly making a nuisance of themselves the day before. Crazer only muttered about his sore rear end from staying in the saddle for so long, which earned a few choice remarks from Ferric. Hageon had forgotten that the man probably would have traveled on foot and marched rather than ridden when the army was on the move. It had never occurred to him that Crazer might not be used to riding on horseback for so long at a time. But he gave Crazer no sympathy. He would have plenty of time to adjust. "So tell me, my grumpy little friend, what is your home like?" Ferric asked Crazer as they rode. "How are the people? What brought you so far from home?" Crazer spat 5 times before replying. "There's nothing in Volcarn. The land's empty, pitted. Nothing grows there but thick grasses and some scattered trees that aren't really good for anything. Some people make a living there, all their lives herding their animals to different camps all year. Some of the caravans leave and travel through other countries to sell their goods and bring back magics from other lands. The animals that live there are creatures you northerners would call monsters, creatures that call you out into the night to eat and take your shape, and other things that are even more twisted and dark. Some people say that they come from the forest of Kirkek to the east." "Sounds splendid," Ferric said cheerfully, "but you haven't told me what brings you, little Bukari, so far from home to serve in the Imperial Army. Your country was never claimed as part of the Empire. Why would you enlist? How did you enlist?" Crazer looked deathly serious for the first time since they had met, and his words had an earnestness that betrayed him. "Your empire would never want my people. We don't have anything to offer, but we know where power is and when to stay on its good side. I left because there was nothing for me at home. Make no mistake, we are fair-weather friends to the Empire and its servants. Right now, we are left in peace. But when the time comes and the Empire sickens, we will be there, ready to help it fall." Hageon glanced back over his shoulder, wondering if he should execute the man he had gone through so much trouble to take into his employ. Ferric seemed to be thinking the same thing, judging by the expression on his face. It would not have been the first time that Hageon had hired someone and had to kill them for treason.
A long-buried memory struck Hageon with a jolt. He felt a cold rush through him like a lightning strike. He whipped his horse around and bore down on Crazer, startling Ferric and their god and clearly terrifying Crazer. The man moved instinctively as if to reach for his blade, but Hageon knocked his hand aside, grabbing him by the chin instead to raise his face better. He stared at him closely, tempestuous seas battling the deep earth as their eyes met for a moment. What was it that nagged him so? There was a long, drawn-out moment where all were waiting to see what the other would do. Finally, Hageon gave a dark chuckle and allowed Crazer to yank his face from his grasp. "I am sorry, my little caravan friend. You look so familiar to me, but I believe I am mistaken. Have no doubt, you bring a warmth to my heart with your conviction, so long as that conviction remains in your heart and not a thorn in my side." Crazer subsided into surly mutterings of his own language as Hageon turned his horse and resumed his place ahead. His words had left Hageon with a nagging doubt, but he dismissed them as mere bravado. He had seen hundreds of good men fall victim to it before and say things they might never even think otherwise. Ferric often said many things he never should, but so far had not suffered too terribly for it. This Bokhari had plenty to prove to them. Men who had conquered and led and seen cities fall before them, and that made for awkward beginnings. "I won't deny you that war is never a good thing. Never a thing anyone wants," Hageon finally said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "But in the past 15 years, I have seen that people do not suffer under imperial rule. If anything, they seem to have flourished under it." "You're from Cirast, aren't you?" Crazer asked. Hageon and Ferric both nodded. "Then how do you know their lives weren't flourishing before the Cirastian army came?" Their guide made his own comment, but none of them understood. Ferric brushed it off completely, and though Hageon made an attempt to acknowledge it, he was sure the man did not understand him either. Crazer lapsed back into silence. Ferric was about to make a comment when the land fell away from them and they were all struck speechless. They were at the edge of one of the great chasms. The rock simply sheared off as though some great god had smashed it away in anger. The rift stretched on for miles ahead of them and to either side, their path turning to the left and following along the narrow rim. The stone rippled with rivers of vibrant reds and yellows and oranges and browns, and here or there Hageon thought he might have seen shades of purple and blue. Pillars of stone rose upward like islands in a vast empty sea. The wind rushed up, blowing their clothes and tousling their hair, and the smell of salt and stone pushing the air from their lungs. It was vast and breathless, timeless and ancient, a sight that made one realize just how small they really are. Hageon wished that he could immortalize that scene in his mind. He wished he had a way to show his family, to show anyone at home what he could see in that moment, so that they might understand. He would never be able to do it justice with words. A painter could try and capture the image, but he would never truly be able to show it. Hageon had seen things he would never wish for people to see in their lives, but this was the one thing in all his travels that he wished he could share. It made amends, at least, for the suffering and cruelties of war, and even revived a dim spark of hope that Hageon had thought burned out of him a long time ago. No one at home will see this country that was so important to take, Ferric said suddenly. Hageon glanced over at him. Not a single one of them will ever venture out here to see any of this. We will ride home, they will talk about great conquest, and not a single damn one of them will know what they speak of. They stared together a moment longer before Ferric turned his horse away and urged it after the guide that was waiting patiently for them. Crazer too soon turned away. Hageon remained at the brink. He wondered briefly how easy it would be to step over the edge. Would there be a ledge there to catch him and save him? Or would he just plummet the great height to the chasm bottom far below? He wondered if it would feel like flying that little bit of time before he hit the ground. What would come after? He turned his horse so that he could lean and get a better view over the edge, his head swimming when he saw how high they really were. "Hey, be careful," Ferric called. "I will not have my name cursed for generations hereafter because I let the great hero of the Cirastian Empire fall into a pit." "Afraid it might look bad on your record," Hageon called back, pulling himself away from the edge and joining his companions. It still felt somehow like the chasm was calling to him. "Somehow I feel your family would be greatly disheartened to hear I had left you as pieces and jam in a ditch somewhere on the far side of the continent," Ferric said, his tone light and his expression serious. He was eyeing Hageon speculatively. Their guide snapped something at them in Auton, and Crazer gestured in agreement. "Now that we know how valuable we are, we should keep moving." Ferric urged his horse to trot ahead, giving Hageon appropriate time and space with his thoughts. He was still seriously considering dismissing Crazer already, despite the offer for him to travel with them safely, and yet somehow he could not. He had offered him safe travel and even potential employment if all went well, and he would not renege on that for one moment of thoughtless speech and some barbed remarks exchanged. He and Ferric would have been court-martialed long ago by those standards. He did try to question Crazer more about his history and his family before the war, but it was clear that the Bokhari was uncomfortable. "There's nothing to hide, and there's nothing to share," Crazer said finally. "I grew up in a caravan. We traveled everywhere and saw a little bit of everything. I was a good hunter while I was with the caravan, but I turned 19 and the family thought I wasn't pulling my own weight and told me to make a living for myself some other way. We were in Dawston then, and near an Imperial outpost, and a barracks with a warm bed and food didn't sound bad. So I asked to enlist. They were surprised too, but it was 7 years into this war and they needed bodies. I've been auxiliary ever since." "You've been fighting in this war for 8 years now?" Ferric asked, turning back in his saddle to look at Crazer. 8 years that were too long, and I couldn't wait for it to be over," Crazer answered. "What about you two? Joined straight from the Imperial heart to fight for the cause. 7 years, 8 years?" "All of it," Hageon replied grimly.